So many people have a hard time figuring out how much yardage they'll need for the backs of their quilts. And a lot of times we're at the mercy of what's ever in our stash, or at the mercy of whoever helps us at the fabric store, and we might not understand what they're saying. Now, as I explained how I do these three different methods that I'll show you, you might not understand it right away either, but here are some ways that I figure out how much yardage I'll need for my quilt back. This is a pretty average size of a lap quilt, or it might even fit a twin bed, 75 by 92. So long-arm quilters need that around 10 inches. Consult your long-armer. So you'll need a back that is 85 by 102. Now once you start getting in the 100s, it's most economical to get a wide back. They have 108 wide backs, so then you could get about 90 inches, and you could just get 85. I'm saying 90 or more, depending how your store cuts. At Susie's Stash in Richardson, we make a snip and rip the fabric so it's straight of grain. Some stores cut it. With such a wide back, it becomes twisted on the bolt, so then if it's cut with a rotary cutter, it could be very crooked. So depending how your store cuts, get extra. But that's the most economical. Otherwise, you could get two lengths, because your width of fabric is about 40, but if you leave the selvages on, like, it doesn't bother the quilter. In fact, quilters like to have that straight edge, so you could get up to 42 inches, I would say, pretty easily for each width of fabric. So you'll have at least 80, 84. So I don't think that'll be a problem. Then you get 102 inches length twice. Now what I'm about to show you in the video, pretend this is 204 or 5 2/3 yards of fabric. Now to make the back, you could cut those two lengths of fabric, but in my cutting room, I don't have a lot of room, so I would just fold it on itself, that whole length, the 204, align the selvages, and stitch along the selvage edge with a generous allowance. Then I would trim thickly woven selvage off, and then in order to open it up, I would snip it open along here, and then I would open it, and I would have my back if you rip, it should follow along the grain. So we're just taking it slow. Equal pressure on both sides. Now with the newer digital printed stuff, that tends to run quite a bit beyond where you ripped. That's one reason I don't like digital, and it seems to snag and run when you long arm it, when you quilt it. So That's my straight edge, and then without too much prep except for pressing, I'm ready to sew my two big pieces of backing together. Well, 3 pieces. Pinning along the edge where I'm going to attach these 2 backing pieces, I think I have enough, but just to be sure, I'm going to piece this in. I think this is excess, but just to be sure, in case this does wind up on the quilt, I have another piece, but I will attach that. Okay, I'm ready to sew my first seam. I'm overhanging a little bit because it does straighten out over on this side. I did not take care to trim or square off the fabric. I'm using the edge of my foot as my guide. I'm just away about 1/8 of an inch or so. More like a 1/16, I suppose. This fabric is kind of slippery. So if you have something like those grippy brand new garden gloves with those little dot grips on the palm, that works good for holding the fabric. I'm not pushing by any means, but I'm just guiding it and managing the weight and making sure I'm not stitching in the folds of the fabric underneath. So much easier to handle when you can grip. This being the first time I ripped backing fabric, I am impressed by how straight it is, but not only how ripping along the edge of the fabric makes a straight grain in which to piece, but look at how the fabric company printed this so straight on the fabric. A lot of times the design is crooked on the fabric because it's printed off grain, but this is just gorgeous. Here's the back of my Kiri Nation. This end was just slightly shorter. That's just needed to load in the frame. It will probably be cut off. I just wasn't sure if I needed even a few inches. It's better to have ample supply than to be short and then have to fix it when it's on the frame. It distorts the threads just a tiny bit, but that will be taken up in the seam allowance, so I don't see any problem with that. The thing about ripping, since I ripped cross grain first, and then I ripped lengthwise. It lines up perfectly with my straightened panel. You can just see the little threads peeking out. And then here's the rip going down the lengthwise, and I'm just going to pin it before I sew it. But it's kind of neat how I know everything is straight, because when ripping, it goes right along the thread, the grains of the thread. Notice I keep the selvage on because that provides a straight edge when I load the back on the quilt frame. And this is a tossed pattern, but if you work with directionals, you have to really be careful and double check your work to make sure you're oriented the proper direction. Here again, I'm lining up the ripped edge with the top and with the sides of the panel. When I straightened out the panel, I had this extra little white showing from the selvage. I wasn't that concerned because I will take about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the back, so that'll disappear in there, but it helps. That's how it's squared up, so I just left it. It didn't show that much. So you might have to fiddle with fabric, but you know, it moves, so you can manipulate it a little bit. And then I'll pin and stitch. Here's another thing I use the Stripology ruler for. The ruler has lines extended to the edge of the ruler. So I'm just, for instance, following this up the seam, lining that on the seam, and aligning here. And it doesn't reach all the way to this edge, but I use that to help make sure I'm square. Oops, let me check it again. And then I'll use the outside of the ruler for my straight edge. And I'm running out of room in my tiny little area. That's why I decided I'm going to try to rip, because to take things to my little cutting table is a little bit daunting. And then I have, even to the edge of the ruler, there's a 1/4 inch line. Well, there's 1/4 inch lines all the way until the inch line. So I can line those up again and go to the edge of my, go to the edge of my fabric. So that's another use for the Stripology ruler. It's wide enough to cover the requirement of the long arm. And now I will do the same thing. I'm going to measure and see if 20 inches on the top and bottom is enough. Then I'll just use the 1/2 of width of fabric across the top and the bottom. I will just probably rip it in half and then sew.